In America, some trials are remembered for the verdict. The O.J. Simpson trial is remembered for something larger, the moment a courtroom became a national mirror. In June of 1994, Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman were found dead outside Brown's home in Brentwood, Los Angeles. Within days, police attention turned to Orenthal James Simpson, former football star, actor, celebrity, and ex-husband of Nicole Brown Simpson. The criminal case that followed was People v. Orenthal James Simpson. It was a murder trial, but it also became a public test of DNA evidence, police credibility, racial memory, domestic violence, celebrity power, and the meaning of reasonable doubt. The first image many Americans remember is not a courtroom, it is a freeway. On June 17, 1994, as Simpson was expected to surrender, he instead became the passenger in a white Ford Bronco driven by his friend A.C. Cowlings. Police followed. Television stations cut into normal programming. Millions watched a slow-speed pursuit unfold across Los Angeles. The chase did not prove guilt, it did not decide the case. But it changed the scale of the story. A criminal proceeding was now a national broadcast event. By January 1995, the courtroom had become one of the most watched legal spaces in the country. Judge Lance Ito presided. The prosecution argued that physical evidence connected Simpson to the killings. The defense argued that the evidence could not be trusted. That difference became the heart of the trial. For the prosecution, the case was built through science and sequence. Blood evidence, DNA testing, hair and fiber comparisons, a glove, a cap, shoe print evidence, the timeline from Brentwood to Simpson's Rockingham estate. Prior domestic violence evidence was also used to give the jury context for the relationship between Simpson and Nicole Brown Simpson. The prosecution wanted the jury to see a pattern, opportunity, physical traces, and conduct after the deaths. But the defense saw a different pattern. They argued that the investigation was compromised by contamination, poor handling, rushed assumptions, and police misconduct. They challenged the chain of custody. They attacked the credibility of officers and criminalists. And they placed the Los Angeles Police Department inside a larger public memory, the city after the Rodney King beating, the 1992 unrest, and years of distrust between law enforcement and black communities. This was not a side issue, it became one of the central legal strategies of the defense. In a criminal trial, the question is not whether a defendant might have done it. The question is whether the government has proven guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. That standard is intentionally high. It is designed to protect defendants from conviction when the state's proof is uncertain, corrupted, incomplete, or unreliable. The defense did not need to prove who killed Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman. It needed to convince at least one juror that the prosecution had not met its burden. The evidence phase became a battle over trust. DNA evidence was new to many viewers in 1995. In the abstract, it sounded powerful. In court, it became vulnerable to questions about collection, storage, labeling, transport, and interpretation. A scientific result can only be as persuasive as the process that produces it. Then came the glove. One of the most famous moments in American trial history was not a legal doctrine. It was a demonstration. Simpson tried on gloves connected to the case in front of the jury. The defense turned the moment into a simple phrase. If it doesn't fit, you must acquit. The phrase worked because it compressed a long, complicated trial into a single visual doubt. But the trial was never only about one glove. It was about how jurors processed a mountain of information. It was about which witnesses they believed, which procedures they trusted, and which narrative felt coherent after months of testimony. Outside the courtroom, the country was processing something else. People watched the same evidence and reached different conclusions. Some saw a celebrity escaping accountability. Some saw a police department with credibility problems. Some saw the power of race in American criminal justice. Some saw media turning grief into spectacle. The split was not random. Public reaction often followed lines of race, class, geography, and personal experience with law enforcement. That is why the case remains so difficult to discuss. It was never just one argument. It was several national arguments happening at the same time. On October 3, 1995, the jury returned its verdict. O.J. Simpson was found not guilty on the murder counts. The words were brief. The reaction was not. In some rooms there was relief, in others disbelief. In offices, classrooms, homes, and newsrooms, Americans watched one verdict produce opposite emotional realities. Legally, the criminal case was over. Simpson had been acquitted. The government had not persuaded the jury beyond a reasonable doubt. But the legal story did not end there. The families pursued civil litigation. In that later civil case, the burden of proof was lower. A civil jury found Simpson responsible for the deaths and awarded damages. The difference between the criminal verdict and the civil result is not a contradiction in procedure. It is a lesson in legal standards. Criminal law asks whether the state can take away liberty. Civil law asks whether one party is legally responsible to another. The evidence can be similar, but the burden is different. That distinction is one reason the Simpson case remains a teaching tool. It shows how evidence can be strong to one audience and insufficient to another. It shows how courtroom trust can collapse when investigators lose credibility. It shows how a defense can win not by replacing the prosecution's story with a complete alternative, but by making the prosecution's story feel unsafe. It also shows the cost of turning a trial into mass entertainment. The cameras gave the public access. They also changed the atmosphere around the case. Lawyers became television figures. Witnesses became characters. Legal arguments became slogans. The victims risked being overshadowed by the machinery of spectacle. For a justice system, visibility is not the same as understanding. The O.J. Simpson trial forced Americans to look at DNA, policing, race, celebrity, domestic violence, and reasonable doubt all at once. No single verdict could resolve those tensions. That is why, decades later, the case still feels unfinished in public memory. Not because the criminal court failed to give an answer. It did give one, not guilty. And not because the civil court stayed silent. It did not. The case endures because it exposed a deeper question. When a society does not trust the institutions gathering the evidence, can even the strongest evidence carry the weight of justice? This is YALA, observing the record. The archive does not ask us to relive the spectacle. It asks us to separate the signal from the noise, the verdict from the reaction, and the law from the myth that grew around it.